Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third episode of Press Hypercritical, where my co-founder and colleague David Krug and I talk about kind of the nitpicky stuff of WordPress and online business in hopes that it helps refine some ideas and some thoughts and some directions for you, your small business, medium-sized business, large business, whatever it might be. Even if you're not using WordPress, I hope you find value in each and every one of these video podcasts that we do. And thank you again so much for joining me today, Krug.
Hey, no problem.
So security is a broad topic, but it's one that you and I have had more than a little bit of experience with. I mean, WordPress security has been all over the map. There's a lot of people out there that believe like WordPress security, like WordPress because it's open source is insecure, or WordPress because it's had security issues is thus insecure. And I mean, I've used Drupal, Joomla, ModX, Expression Engine. I mean, you can go down the list of all the CMS systems that I've had the opportunity to use. And two things stand out. One is they typically have a lot of the same kinds of security issues as WordPress, or two, they just don't have as many people that care to try to figure out ways around security, or they don't have the big notifications about patches for security. And I mean, the other part of this is that WordPress is not an island upon itself, right? You have plugins and themes that interject their own issues. And so I thought we could kind of tease apart some of these things and help people understand why WordPress security is so widely talked about, what they can and can't do about it, and kind of what our suggestions are about security. So why don't you kick us off?
Well, it's a very, very broad issue. I mean, security is what people consider security might not actually be security. It might just be common sense. Unfortunately, that's the biggest issue is common sense says don't set your password to be your cat's name or your children's name followed by a number string. Like that's everybody does that. Everybody knows you're using your birthday or your cat's birthday with your cat's name. Like, really doesn't need to be Susie 1985 is not a good password for your administrator account.
Oh no, you caught me. Oh darn. Gotta change all my passwords now.
You know what I mean? It's like setting your ATM password to be 1234. These things are just not advisable.
And yet we see them all the time, right? Like one of the big issues for passwords is that people have this misunderstanding about the rules of passwords. And there's a great cartoon, like a comic that I saw a long time ago, and I wish I could remember the name of the artist right now. It eludes me, but if I find it, I'll put it in the show notes.
Void, right?
Sorry?
Escaping Void.
It might be it. I'll have to double check. But basically, it talks about the fact that the reason that people don't like modern passwords is because they want like, H5, N5, exclamation point, Q, hash symbol, capital T5. And everyone's like, I can't remember that. Like, what the heck string is that? I can't even repeat back to you what I just said. That's how complex and complicated that is. And they think if I have a password like that, I'm secure and, all is good in the world. And yet I think that was like an 8-character password, which in modern computing is brute forcing that isn't that hard. So the suggestion that they gave was to kind of like string together 4 or 5, like 3 to 4 letter words that have no interrelationship and no personal relationship, but kind of create a story in your mind so that they're easy to remember, right? Like red cup, yellow barn as a password, and then toss a number or an exclamation point at the end of that. And you've created something that's much more complicated for a computer to figure out. It's way longer, so it takes longer to brute force, and it's rememberable. Do you use any kind of password management tools or applications yourself?
Well, from a personal standpoint, I use really horrible passwords that are that go absolutely against the security grain. So I use like an easy to remember phrase or word or whatever, right? Really horrible, followed by some random string of letters and an exclamation point. You know what I mean? So I do really bad. But on some of my other newer projects, what I've started doing is actually have like a book that I keep at my desk because I'm only use passwords at my desk. And what I do is, and all I do is I go onto a website that generates a passphrase and grab it, and I set. It can tell you how many numbers, how many like units the passphrase would be, so I can set it up to like 15, 20, 25, a combination. I just set it at like 15, 16, 17, whatever, however many I decide. Um, Let it set it up and make that my password. And I just started doing this, and then I just keep a little book next to my desk and I write them down. So then every time I, just have to type it in, or I allow my password manager on my computer keychain to use to save the password. Um, and that works. I still like to keep a hard copy just in case my computer dies, so I can get into my things. But that started doing that. I think a passphrase is the only way to go, really. Um,
So I use LastPass for a lot of my password management, and I will agree with you on certain things. I use very simplistic passwords that are easy for me to remember, things that I'm logging into every day. I try to remember to rotate them. I've even have some calendar reminders for every like 6 to 8 months saying, "Hey, don't forget you want to change your personal email password again." Um, I go a little bit overboard on that side on the things that I use every day that I kind of use these very simplistic passwords, but for like client stuff or for server administration access and things like that, I use LastPass to kind of like give me a big long string of encoded characters that I don't need to personally remember, and then I have one password to access a lot of these things. It's unfortunate because it gets a little bit annoying sometimes on my phone, because every time I log into a new site, it's like, hey, do you want me to remember this? I'm like, oh, geez, go away. And then I got to like log in and say, yes, remember this stupid password, which isn't ideal on my phone. But I get the point of it. And there are lots of different tools for people to use. I used to use KeyPass in some of my old jobs, which is a free password management tool. It's a little kind of clunky and ugly, but it works no problem. Works like a treat. And there are a bunch of other ones that you can use to be able to secure things. In terms of WordPress specifically, though, one of the things that I wanted to talk about today is how WordPress stores passwords. And they're like a SHA-1 encoded string, right? But it actually also takes MD5 strings. So they no longer by default store passwords in MD5 strings. They used to back when we used to use WordPress back in the 2.0 days. They've moved away from that, thankfully. But you can actually, if I can get access to your database, I can type in a password that I want your admin account to be, and I can select a little drop down in PHP My Admin that says MD5 this string, and boom, that password is actually accepted by WordPress as a valid password, and I can go and now access your site or do whatever I want to your site using an MD5 hash of a password that I've inserted to your database. Of course, if I have access to your database, I can use an SHA-1 password string and put it in there as well. But the idea that WordPress stores passwords or allows passwords to be stored as an MD5 string is kind of a little wonky in my opinion. But in a general sense, WordPress is really only as secure as your database, one, and the strength of your user passwords. And we actually had an issue recently where we logged into a site and like everyone had an admin level access. And if you think about that, right, you're multiplying the opportunities for someone to get into this site, because if you've gotten rid of the admin user, which is kind of like that old wisdom of don't install WordPress with admin as your administrator user or as one of your users, because you've already given up half of the quest of trying to get access to your site. But if you have like a dozen people with different usernames that all have admin access, you've multiplied the chance that someone's going to be able to get in, that they're going to be able to figure out a username and then figure out a password as kind of a 1-2 punch. And go ahead.
Especially if usernames are like John and Susan and Linda and Steven, we're pretty much giving away the farm, and that was really on us.
Well, it's hard, right? Because everyone thinks that they need admin access in WordPress. They need to be able to control everything. They need to be able to do everything. And I think that's partly WordPress's fault for not creating built-in user access control, or at least more refined rules options. There are plugins that you can add to this, but we really try to pull away from plugins as much as possible and use core functionality of WordPress when we're developing these sites, in part for speed. And so it'd be nice if they built in some, just not even like the detail that role manager plugins have, but just some more granularity of control in terms of the different user roles and what they have permission to. We've even run into situations where the company that we were working with thought that there was like a super administrator account, and we were kind of like, what are you talking about? Like, administrator is administrator. But I think they thought that the primary install administrator had even more access than a general administrator that was added to WordPress. And the role management in WordPress is just so flat, that it's just like administrator, editor, contributor, subscriber. I think there's one more role in there that I'm missing. But there's really not many user roles in WordPress, and I think that's kind of a little bit of an Achilles heel for the software as well.
Yeah, I think there's a deep confusion that everybody needs to have administrator. You're hitting it on the nail on the head there, because realistically, the people that should have an administrator role are really two people: the person that owns the website and anybody you trust to do your IT.
Now, what's really funny to me is going through school and even after school, one of the big pieces of common wisdom with managing a Linux server is to never do things as root, right? You always want to like create a separate user account and give them the permissions that they need, and kind of use that primarily as your day-to-day account, and then you SU to do commands as root if you need to. And it's funny that we don't do the same thing with WordPress and other like CMS systems. We don't create a separate user for day-to-day and have the admin account be this kind of, almost never used account, except for like when everything goes wrong. And I think that might be something that needs to be publicized and pushed more in the WordPress community, or even in the CMS community in general, as the same kind of rules as we would do on a server, we should be doing as our CMSs.
Well, I guess I kind of wish that was the case in some ways. Like, the administrator account was not able to publish
Right.
or edit posts,
Right.
would all of a sudden create that same core functionality of you need to have an actual writer editor's kind of account in order to make changes to your website. But if
Right.
you're getting something technical, you need an administrator account.
Wouldn't that be nice?
And then all of a sudden you would have this kind of firewall, because here's a clear example of how this would play out. For example, if someone broke into a non-administrator account, all they could do was mess around with some content.
Right.
They couldn't do some of the technical functions like install plugins, install themes, et cetera, change user roles. But if they got into the admin account, they couldn't change content. They could particularly change user roles, but the point I was trying to make is it would be a lot harder for other people to hack in. It would also be harder for people to make mistakes when they're setting their own passwords, and it wouldn't
Right.
put the danger of password security so much on users that just don't realize they have an administrator account.
And that's a great point. We work with a lot of non-technical people who have admin access to WordPress for one reason or another, who, I mean, they're non-technical. They, what they know about passwords could barely fill a tiny little cup, right? Like it's not their priority. And previously we've added plugins to make it so that you were required to have a password of a certain strength, or to limit login attempts. And both of these directions that we've tried to take password security in the past have been met with huge resistance, because they're like, I want to use, I want to use the same password that I use for my email, or I want to use the same password that I use for Facebook, or I want to use the same password as I use for Twitter. And we just kind of like cringe and facepalm and stuff like that. But the flip side is we're in a service industry, and there's only so much that we can push on a user before they push back. And
Right.
That's kind of the weakest part of security in terms of what we're doing.
Well, and at one point I soft tested on some of our clients that every 30 days their password would expire. So tried that for a while. People just got more angry with us because they couldn't log in, and they would just get frustrated. And then they'd email us, and then if we didn't respond right away, they would be more mad at us, and it just too much friction, right?
Right.
And that's the polar opposite of, so it's just like if you're going to an airport, same kind of thing. You're dealing with security. Like, do you decide you're going to have a lot of security and you're okay with it, and you're giving away your freedom in order to have that lot of security, or are you just going to let anyone through? And that's kind of a similar parallel when it comes to how we manage security. So personally, my firm belief is most people aren't trying to get into your WordPress install. Most people.
Right.
Most people I know aren't gonna say, "Hey Malcolm, I'm gonna try to get into your WordPress install today. I'm gonna sit down, I'm gonna spend my 40 minutes and try to hack into your website." No, they don't do that. That being said, one of the biggest issues in WordPress security are criminal organizations, like fairly sophisticated, really very organized organizations based all over the world. We could say specifically like Europe and Asia would be some hotspots, although there's South America as well. There's some hotspots, and even the U.S. But specifically, some of these Asian groups where literally that's all they do: sit around and break into WordPress websites and install, some kind of malware into the site, some kind of backdoor, whether it's in the database or in a plugin or somewhere they're injecting code to make money, and that's really what it's all about. They're not defacing. They're not trying to deface the website. They're trying to inject something in and make money.
Yeah, and we've seen this a couple times where they'll actually like target a specific user group, right? Like iPhone users who are browsing the site, who have come from Google, like they'll get very specific, and it's like 99.9% of people won't actually see the advertisement, but that 0.1%, they're like, they think they got that conversion kind of thing, right? So, and they're trying to make as few waves as possible typically so that they can go on as long as possible to kind of get what they want. And we've seen this a couple of times on different sites and even client sites that we've had to clean up. But so then we get the request, right? We'll just install a security plugin like Security or whatever, or a logging plugin that'll like tell us what everything that's happened on the website. Why isn't that like just the solution? Like, let's just do that, right?
Well, that's a good one. So we had a security breach. It was probably like around 3 years ago on a website that I was managing, and they were just inserting these somewhat not really that noticeable links that this company was obviously hacking into a website or using an insecure password, and then selling text links for SEO purposes within content. Not even changing the content that much, but maybe adding a sentence that they thought no one would notice. And they were doing this for quite a while, like probably close to a year. And so the client said, "Go ahead and add this logging plugin, audit everybody. We're going to track everybody. We're going to see if someone from the inside is doing this or someone from the outside is doing this." And the second we installed this plugin, all of a sudden their site came crawling to a halt, because what these kind of plugins do is security plugins, these audit plugins, and everything. What they do is they're constantly writing to the database, just constantly. Every action, every interaction on the site, whether it's the front end or back end, any action on the site is getting logged. It's creating massive database bloat. Oh,
Yeah, and if it's not typically logging to your own database, then it's like a software as a service thing where it's actually like connecting to a third-party server and logging to kind of their database, right? So you can potentially have more or less latency to that, but it's not necessarily fast. And so as we've kind of come into this modern world of search engine optimization being all about kind of speed, about the technical optimization, having these logging plugins, having a lot of these security plugins, they can really reduce the speed at which your site loads. They can cause their own issues. We've seen places where people have installed 2 or 3 of these plugins and they conflict and don't interact well. We've seen security plugins or logging plugins that don't work well with other general plugins that exist on the site, or even themes that exist on the site. Right? If you have a theme that has a huge functions file, functions.php file, it can cause problems. If you have a theme that for some reason they thought they were being smart and base64 encoded their PHP so that you couldn't edit their theme because they thought they were smart and locking it down, and all of a sudden the security plugin is like, well, base64 is only used for hacking, so this theme must be hacked, and now you're trying to diagnose an issue and you're being told to switch themes, and the whole thing can just be a ridiculous nightmare of you chasing your tail for potentially no reason. And so that's not fun. So, false positives, security slowing down websites, um, overwhelming information. That's another thing to think about, right? Who's going to review these logs? Who's going to review these security plugins? What are they going to understand with regards to the information coming in? We get to the point sometimes where we have so much information kind of thrown at us that we reach a saturation point and then we just don't care anymore, because it's like, I don't know what half this stuff is, so I don't care about any of it. And you might have hear people say that out there, right? And that's a real shame when it comes to security, because then the plugin does nothing. It's actually a negative net effect by having these security plugins. You might assume that you're safe when you're actually not, right? Maybe you haven't updated the security plugin in a while. Maybe the security plugin hasn't had an update in a while. Maybe the security website is a software as a service and the service is down. All of these things happen, and most people just don't care. They don't really think about it. Once they have the plugin in place, they're just like, I'm safe. And that is not the case.
Yeah, and we see that where people think that everything's okay because they have this audit plugin in place, or they've installed the latest, greatest, new, fancy, whistly thing, and so therefore everything's good. And that's just not the case. Going back a little bit to users, and I think because users play a big part in security, because honestly, for the most part, I would say 95% of all the security issues that I've probably personally dealt with over the last few years, I can trace it back to users specifically not having good passwords. If you're running an organization, you should have an official password policy. Whether it's you change your password every 6 months, every month, every quarter, every whatever it is, and you just stick to that. And I think that's the big issue. That's the real biggest security issue out there, is people just don't have any kind of official processes or policies when it comes to security, and they trust some magical software to do the job. And that's, I think, where the biggest weakness is. We want software solutions that just fix everything for us. Like, plugin in place is just going to solve things. But really, it just comes down to self-determination and good ethics, good standards of practice, that you're just sitting down and you're going, okay, I'm going to set strong passwords. And you can go as far as this. Why don't you change your username every month? It doesn't hurt anything. Like, create a master username. That's your only administrator account on your WordPress website, and you change it every single month. It wouldn't hurt anything. And it would be a magical string of numbers for the username and a magical string of, other sequences for the password. And you just did this every month, and the rest of your accounts were all just editors. And
Right.
basically you would have 100% secure site, and
Yeah, and I mean, people are gonna complain because it seems like a bit of a pain in the butt, and it is, but it's a pain in the butt for good reason. If you're running an e-commerce site and you're not worried about password security, you're doing it wrong. I mean, we've seen so many information breaches from even major players like Facebook, who have kind of fallen on their sword because of security. And so there are so many tools out there to do automated scans about what version of WordPress you're running, what plugins you're running, do kind of automated dictionary tags, automated brute force tags. Like, all these tools exist, and they're out there just kind of scanning the web, looking for opportunities, right? It's not necessarily a person sitting behind a computer trying to type logins into your system, right? They're testing it through APIs and XML RPC. They're testing it through automated scripts that run through things, and they're not even necessarily targeting you specifically. They're just broadly targeting different sites for different searches to try to kind of gain traction in their advertising, like we mentioned before. So password security, if you're doing e-commerce, especially if you're doing any kind of sales, if you're collecting any kind of user information, it should be one of the top 5 things on your mind, because you do not want your business to have to say, hey, everybody, we need you all to change your passwords. Sorry if any of your credit card information was compromised. That's not good.
So the other one is let's move on a little bit into server security.
Hmm.
And I think because server security doesn't really apply to the average consumer or really the average business, but one of the things that I would say that is really relevant in terms of server security is who do you host your website with? Is it a reputable firm? And do you have a VPS or are you using shared hosting? Because one of the dangers of running a business, and I've seen this for plenty of people, they run a business using a shared web host.
Right.
So this one a few years ago I dealt with where someone was running like 20 websites on a shared, I won't name the company's account, on a shared hosting plan with this particular company. And every single WordPress install was accessible on that server. Just they didn't realize it. They didn't recognize how deep. But if you had access to move up one folder, you could get access to all the other installs on that. And it was like this weird loophole that I saw. It was obviously an accident by
Right.
some like, systems administrator accidentally left it open. But all I did was I accidentally went up one folder, and there was all these WordPress installs that I had no idea whose they were, and it was crazy because I thought, whoa! All of a sudden, I can access anybody, and all those sites, if they're smart at all, they could access all the others. So I immediately said, we need to get off of this. We need to move ASAP, move our site, because this company doesn't care. Um,
And even wider than that, right? If for example, I can install a piece of software on a server and I get access to that server to install that software through one of the sites hosted on it, it's like lighting an apartment building on fire, right? It doesn't just affect you, it doesn't just affect one site. It burns down the whole apartment complex and affects everyone that lives there. So yeah, I totally agree with you. And a lot of the vectors for attack actually come through WordPress plugins. I mean, no offense, the code quality for WordPress plugins, some of them are not good at all, and some of them are amazing. And it really depends on the understanding the developer has with regards to security on escaping code and kind of validating the variables that they're getting the data that they expect. Lots of things like that. Security has a great blog where they talk about different vulnerabilities, different security issues that come up. And just from, just over the last month, they posted 6 major security vulnerabilities with WordPress plugins. And they're not like plugins with like 200 installs or 500 installs. These are plugins with like 10,000 installs, 100,000 installs, 500,000 installs. WP database backup, SlimStat, live chat support plugin, the plugin for Give, which stored XSS for donors, Ultimate Member, and WP Meta and Date Remover. So like these are not tiny plugins, and these plugins seem kind of innocuous in a way, right? Because it's like WP Meta and Date Remover, like really, what kind of deep functionality would that have? And it had a persistent cross-site scripting issue in one of the recent versions. And yes, all of these issues have been patched since these releases went out, but this is one of those things where, again, the more plugins you have, the more potential vulnerabilities you have, the more you have to be concerned about updates, the more you have to kind of monitor what's happening on your site. And I get, again, that it's a point of frustration for site managers, but that's why managed hosting exists. That's why managed services exist. That's why security services exist. All these companies exist to allow you to focus on your business, on the need of creating content or converting users, and let someone else kind of take care of what they're an expert in. Because I don't know about you, when I first started working on WordPress, some things took a very long time to do, and that time would have been better spent in other areas. I mean, now thankfully I look back on it and go, I'm so glad I spent all that time because I have this wealth of knowledge. But back when I first started, I was like, I wish I could just hire someone else to do all this.
Oh, and I kind of went through the same process. I guess when I was younger, I had all this free time in the world. So instead of going out and, hanging out with my friends or whatever, I'm sitting down there installing WordPress, installing, back in those days, there was another CMS, P Machines, which is now Expression Engine. But there was all these different CMSs, movable type. I would go out and install them, figure out how to run it. I just remember WordPress being one of the more difficult installs, like because it just you had to set up a database. Those days it was a little harder to set up databases than it is now. Things were a little more complex. You had to select the database name, the database host. You had to set all these things manually before you could even get WordPress going.
Yeah, now it's just a one-click install on like thousands of hosts out there.
Yeah, now it's just simple. Like nobody thinks anything of it, and it was a lot more difficult. So I'm glad I spent the time, and so we have that knowledge. Going into this theme of plugins being some of the security issues, that's one of our philosophies with Press Titan specifically is less plugins. If I can help somebody solve a plugin issue and turn it into a theme related solution, I'll do it.
Yeah, it's amazing how small the snippets of code that we've added to the functions.php file to provide similar functionality as some of these like massive plugins or even like small plugins, right? Which you know, do too much. They interact with WordPress in a way that isn't really needed. It could just be this small little tiny singular function in a functions.php file, and instead it's like 6 files in a folder in a plugin. That then need its own like admin page and like all this other stuff that doesn't really have to exist in a plugin. And a lot of the times these functions, people again, they know what functions to take advantage of because they can look through the source code. So even just by changing a function name and putting it in a functions.php file in your theme, we've actually made it more secure in a way, right? Like they just don't know what exists and what doesn't exist on the site anymore. It doesn't show up in a scanning tool saying, hey, by the way, you have this membership plugin or you have this like tool on your website.
Yeah, and so I think one of the things you touched on was that's why these services are out there, the managed services, managed support. The average user, in my opinion, should be getting help. If you're just running a website for business, for a hobby, whatever, go ahead and get a managed solution. There's cheap ones out there now. Maybe not us. There's other companies out there that we could recommend that are
Mm-hmm.
managed WordPress for really, really affordable prices, right? It's so much better. Just go ahead and get it. Most of them actually have this, we'll remove any malware, any hacked stuff, we'll remove it. They do real-time database backups, or at least within 12 hours or 24 hours. Do that. It's one of the smarter things you can do.
But Krog, doesn't my web host do security? Like, or
No,
doesn't my developer, like I hired a developer to do a new theme, doesn't he do security?
no. And sometimes I've seen this happen, not super recently, but I hired a developer not too long ago, and I actually had to patch some of their code. I was like, oh, you left some really accidental like cross-site scripting issues like wide open there. Or sometimes they'll leave accidental things in their code base. They don't realize it's shared from another code base. And sometimes developers are not the ones you want because they take shortcuts sometimes where they'll be using code on multiple sites and they'll just keep pushing that same mistake forward on every single site. And it gets to be an issue. One of the other ones that we had, I would say probably about a year ago or so, was a developer had created a theme and a plugin package and tied it together
Mm-hmm.
to one. So anytime the theme and the plugin, either one of them got deactivated, the whole website just white screen of death. I don't know if you remember this issue.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes developers don't have your best interests in mind. They have their best interests in mind.
Well, what about my web host? They have my best interest in mind, right?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So I don't know. It was probably about 18 months ago. We were with one of the major managed web hosting companies in the WordPress infrastructure space, right? And I have a lot of respect for them, mind you. I think they do a good job for the most part. But right around that time, I saw that they were getting greedy. What I mean by getting greedy is is they advertise one thing, but in reality they do something else. This is so common in the hosting space in general. Like if someone says,
Oh, it's like how I get my unlimited storage and my unlimited bandwidth, right?
right, exactly. That's a plain example. Like, so three of the things that was said on their specific advertising was, your site is hosted on its own, on a limited. Here's all the space you get. Here's all the resources you get access to, and when I asked in their support channel, how many sites are hosted in this specific container, their container host. So I said, how many sites are hosted in the specific container? Oh no, your site is isolated in that container. I said, oh great. So the very next week, we had multiple sites go down.
Yeah, huge outage across multiple sites on multiple containers apparently.
Right, and they said all these things happened just randomly.
Right.
All the sites weren't in the same container.
No, of course not.
So I said, okay. So one of the things they advertised was offsite backups.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, okay, can I get those offsite backups? Can I get access to those offsite backups so I can bring the site online because it had already been down for 20 minutes? I said, let's bring the site back online on using your offsite backups.
Yeah, on another container. Easy.
Another container. It would be super simple. Can I get access to those, and I'll even do it myself? I know you guys are busy trying to fix this problem.
Right.
And they said, sir, we actually can't access your offsite backups because they're connected to your container that's down. I said, what? What do you mean? So the offsite backups that we're supposed to be trusting are actually connected to that container?
Mm-hmm.
No explanation for it. Number one, your web host doesn't always have your best interest in mind, and most of the time what they advertise on their homepage and even in their support channels is bold-faced lies. And you just can't trust them.
Yeah, and I mean that's one of the things as we've offered our own services, we've been very clear about what we offer, but it makes it very hard to compete in this space because it seems like the industry can kind of say whatever they want, right? And we don't necessarily want to fall into that trap because it's not what we do, and it's not the type of clients we'd want anyways. What about the people who are like, I'll take care of the security issue when it happens?
So there are companies out there that will help you.
Right.
Solve security issues. For example, let's say you decide not to do anything with your security, right? Let's just say all of a sudden your site got injected with malware today. And you went online, and some of the companies out there that will fix it for you, they'll charge you at minimum $250 to lift a finger. Minimum. But on the high end, if it's a major issue, it could be up to $1,000 for one little issue. And it might only take them 10 minutes to fix it.
Well, but I'll just do it myself. If it just takes 10 minutes to fix it, I'll just do it myself, right? I'll just do a Google search, and then I'll just do what it tells me to do.
It could take you much, much longer, and you might not clean it up. Even us. How many times have we had it happen where we use security tools that we have access to, we cleaned up something, we're like, okay, good, it's done. And
yeah,
came back an hour later or 2 hours later, bam, it's just back.
Yeah. The whack-a-mole experience, right? Like people forget that the issue that you're resolving could be it's a effect of another cause, right? An issue that has caused this access, and then what they do with that access typically is a bunch of different things, right? Like they don't just necessarily inject their code to display an advertisement. They might bury some code in a theme somewhere to continue to give them access. They might create a user account in the database that gives them an administrator access. And so you're out there playing whack-a-mole with this code, removing all these crummy advertisements, removing all these changes to the theme files. And don't forget the WordPress core, they've changed that as well. And okay, I've solved it. And then you didn't check the list of WordPress users, or you didn't reset all the user passwords, or you didn't check the file and folder permissions on the server, or you didn't endless number of things, right? They maybe even got access to the server and rolled back to an older version of Apache or PHP or Linux. There's a whole bunch of things that they can do to provide themselves with future access. And so you play this game of like, oh, I've stopped them here and now I got to stop them there. And oh, don't forget the firewall. And all of these things can be so frustrating. And I don't think that the average user really understands the kind of effort that can be required to resolve these issues after they happen.
Well, I had a very interesting thing where that happened once. It was a very common hack at the time. And they were inserting these mobile ads that were popping up randomly. And all the scans kept showing that the site was clean. So like we were running it through all the top security services out there, security, all these different companies, running the site through saying there's no malware, nothing, no malware. Sometimes it's not malware living on your own server. Sometimes it's on one of the vendors you think you trust.
Right.
Hacked into that, like a third party that you trust. Like you could be installing a plugin that's serving up ads on your site that could be injecting malware into your site that's affecting your own website.
Yeah, and if you do like Google News searches on this, you'll actually find some great articles where over the last 5 years this has happened in an increasing amount of times, right? Where they'll find a way to inject something into the ad manager that again can take over the entire page for people on iPads, or can install something ish on your browser, or even just chew through CPU cycles to mine Bitcoin.
Right. And there's all these things out there. Sometimes you don't know where it is. So you really want to hire somebody that knows what they're doing, I know in terms of Press Titan, if there's a malware issue or an issue, I usually lean on you. I will take a look at it myself, and sometimes I can diagnose the problems.
Right, and we have the tools to kind of help us, give us that lift. We know how to implement those tools to kind of make sure that we have the maximum effect. We're very proactive, which definitely helps. But yeah, it's a combination of effort to really kind of to keep things secure or to resolve issues quickly when they do come up.
Right, and I think you have to be proactive in order to solve the security issues that are out there, and they're going to keep growing. They're going to keep getting bigger. One of the things that I am kind of a fan of for myself, and I keep looking at it more and more, is why do we even need to have usernames and passwords? What are the alternatives out there? There's some new ones that are out there that the 2FA, where you use your phone to unlock your WordPress install. There's some plugins and some scripts out there that will basically eliminate the whole concept of a username and password, so that the only one that's going to ever get access to your site is whoever's holding your phone.
Right.
Which I actually think is, in some ways, a smart way. There's some downsides to it as well.
Yeah, I know. We need Face ID for Logitech webcams so that we can gain access to our websites, or fingerprint readers at all of our computers, or voice prints, or retina scanners. All these movie technologies that we've been promised forever that really, they're starting to come into their own on cell phones, but not really in a general purpose computing sense. So on laptops, ThinkPads have had fingerprint scanners forever and a day, but 90% of people probably never set them up. But even so, when this technology exists, it's not necessarily implemented, which is a real shame. And I think again, what you're alluding to, as more stuff kind of goes to the web, right? As we do all of our e-commerce on here, as we share all of our personal and private details on here, we're gonna have to take this security much more seriously, for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
If you were going to, go ahead.
No, and I think that's the key thing, is just taking it seriously. So it doesn't matter what level you are in terms of where your business is at, or what. If you're running a website, if you're running a business website on WordPress, you need to take it seriously.
Well, on any CMS system, I think one of the things I really want to go back to is the idea that WordPress is no more insecure than anything else, honestly. It's only as secure as you make it, in a way. You control many factors for security, many opportunities for people to get in, and it's kind of on you as the user to understand what you're doing with your website. It's a real shame that, in some sense, there's this continually elevating issue with security, where it can seem really difficult, it can seem very overwhelming, but there's a lot of kind of simple tips that would kind of make security easier, right? So we've talked about passwords, we've talked about limiting plugins, um, we've talked about permissions, which is hugely important. One of the things that we haven't mentioned is kind of deleting unused WordPress plugins or files. Don't keep things active on your WordPress site that you're not actively using. And even if you've deactivated them, get rid of that code from your server because it's not doing you any favors. Um, Things like blocking includes protecting your WP config file, restricting logins to specific IP address ranges, or um, uh, not logging in on public Wi-Fi potentially. Like some of these things are, we can kind of consider them common sense at this point, but um, there's a lot of simple things that you can do to kind of harden your server and to increase your security. Um, One of the fun ones that we found actually is a lot of CDNs now offer some basic security systems through kind of like a firewall system, right? So Cloudflare, even with their free plan, offers you some basic firewall protection, which is kind of nice. Um, there's tools to limit login attempts, right? So the brute force method of like trying a million passwords doesn't work so much if you block an IP address or block a user account after so many tries. Again, you'll have to determine that range and the time period and things like that. People are always talking about WordPress specifically, but all of these things can apply to like any CMS. If you're running Magenta, if you're running Joomla, your Drupal, ModX, password security, file security, permissions, it applies to all of them.
Right. And I mean, the only way to get away from all of that is to host a static HTML website.
Which we're seeing in terms of popularity growth.
Right. And actually, you can do the same thing with WordPress.
Mm-hmm.
You can have WordPress living on one server and hosting the actual website on another server. This is also becoming more and more common, more and more popular. And the actual thing that's being served up is
HTML. It has no PHP. It has nothing to take advantage of.
No PHP. And those things can be set up as well. We have a site set up in a similar fashion that we support currently, or two sites that are set up in a similar fashion. That's something we could always explore for users. But I think, let's talk a little bit about statistics. We host a lot of websites for people in some very lucrative ranges of niches, but specifically the one niche that has been targeted quite a bit because it's got good customers. It's got US based customers with decent CPC out there, and decent CPMs in their space. And so one of the things about having that kind of a client is there is some risk in terms of like malware and ad injection. And this is one of the ones we deal with on a regular basis. But statistically speaking, hacking isn't all that common in terms of injecting things into a website. We deal with probably, a security issue like once a month at the most.
To be fair, though, we keep plugins up to date, we keep themes up to date, we keep WordPress core up to date, we have CDNs that have built-in firewalls, we're hosting on servers that keep like the software is always up to date, latest Linux, latest PHP, latest MariaDB or MySQL. Like, I mean, we've negated a lot of the issues that exist for security, which is not necessarily the typical experience of someone hosting a site these days.
Well, can you give me an example? So I was working with a client the other day that was not part of our hosting. They had their website on a server that had PHP 5.6 running, whereas we run everything on 7.1 or 7.2. We pretty much run everything on the state of the art, the brand newest everything. This was running on 5 point something.
Right.
Can you tell me what are the risks of running a website on an outdated version of PHP? And what could happen to them?
Security patches for PHP directly are pretty rare. They don't come up very often. If they're running the latest 5.6 version, like 5.6 point whatever it is, they're probably fine. I'd have to look up the security releases, but there's a couple of different blogs that track different PHP versions and when the security releases come out. And most hosts are pretty good about applying the security patches. So it's fairly rare to have an issue with PHP specifically that's causing a security issue, but it's not a 0% issue. It does happen here and there. And typically what ends up happening is kind of an elevated permission system where I am able to create a basic generic user, and through that elevate my permissions to be able to access either like your home directory or kind of get a super user account. So through PHP, creating or accessing kind of the user that PHP uses on a Linux machine, and then elevating those permissions.
And I think that's one of the reasons why it's so important to be with a company that is always kind of moving you forward with technology. That's kind of what our philosophy is. We're constantly trying to help our clients move forward with technology. You know, the latest versions that are stable, latest stable versions of WordPress. We don't just throw users on the brand new version of WordPress. We wait until things are stable and there's a good track record going on. And we're always doing that. And I think that's the difference between how we operate and how other companies operate. There's a ton of hosting out there in the space, a lot of different WordPress support. There's not a lot of companies that will really do this white glove, walk your technology forward. Actually, I don't know of a single host that does it. To be honest with you, I don't know of a single one out there. And I don't like to talk about us all that much, but I really don't know of one that will walk your technology forward like what we do for our clients. In terms of we're constantly upgrading their versions of WordPress, their core, their plugins, their themes. Not only that, but we're also upgrading their servers. We're constantly upgrading the software that's running on the servers, et cetera, et cetera. And I just don't know of companies out there that do that. I could be wrong.
And if you know something and you're listening to this episode, feel free to comment. Let us know some other hosts that you think are kind of that top tier, right? Again, we know a lot of the bigger companies that exist using like shared hosting and stuff like that. They, it's hit or miss whether they're good on these things or not. But they're definitely typically not reaching their hand into your WordPress install and making sure that that's okay. One of the things that we haven't talked about that is for us an expectation is SSL.
Everything we do is SSL now. I mean, we don't.
I still run into sites that are not running it.
Yeah, I do too, and I don't understand it. I don't understand because Chrome is the biggest browser on the planet.
Yep.
And Chrome,
what does it say if you're not secure?
It says not secure.
In the address, right next to the address bar, like it tells you, like, not secure. So, like, if you're collecting any kind of user information, even just their email address, you need to have an SSL. Like, come on, people, this is ridiculous. But and some of the pushback that I've heard is, but they're so expensive.
Oh, it's free. Literally, do we charge anything?
No, we use Let's Encrypt SSLs, which are free SSLs that, they're great and they're free. And most hosts out there now support them. And if your host doesn't, if you're on a VPS or something and you need to figure this out yourself, there are amazingly simple scripts that will make it so that you can get a Let's Encrypt SSL and apply it to your site. If they're going to charge you for an SSL, negotiate, argue with them. Those prices typically aren't fixed. I mean, we're not in the good old days of SSLs costing you hundreds of dollars. You should not pay hundreds of dollars for an SSL. You would be better off to move to a different host that offers one for free. So yeah, SSL, like if your website address doesn't say HTTPS, you're not in a good place. And even if it does, if it says not secure next to it, or there's like a red X or some other kind of bad symbol in the address bar when you visit your website, you really need to talk to your host, please.
Well, then there are predatory hosts and even domain registers out there that play into some of these fears, right? For example, that they do charge $300 for an SSL, which is stupid. But then even the register. I was re-registering a domain name recently, and it was it was a very mainstream registrar. And the first thing as I'm checking out that they said was, wait, is your website secure? Sign up for this SSL package. Like, that was the first thing that they were trying to cross-sell me on was SSL.
Yeah.
Now, great that they're trying to promote SSL, but really crappy was they're trying to sell me a $499, SSL certificate that was actually their own certificate, which was
Right.
funny. It was also funny. So they're like have their own certificate, and they're just trying to, sell that to me for $499 at pure profit, and it's greed. And so there's this idea that SSL needs to be expensive, and it doesn't. It can be free. There's tons of services that'll set it up. Even Cloudflare has their shared SSL service, which is decent. It's not the one I recommend, but it does work.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, SSL is a very important issue. We don't do anything.
We don't even think about it anymore. It's like a non-issue because it's all of the sites that we run have an SSL. Like just automatically we do it as part of like a setup process. So
we had to push our clients forward with it though. It wasn't like something that one day they just said, no, let's just do SSL, because we believe in it. No, it was something we told them.
yeah,
Hey,
by the way, Google says you need one. We're getting it to all of your sites.
Yeah, we're going to get it on all of your sites. There was no hesitation because we showed them the data, the information. Now let's talk about the negativity, the negative side of SSL though.
Yeah.
There is a side of SSL that I still have an issue with. Because you can sure fire up your site if it's not SSL. And so that's one of the things I don't like. And I actually talk to a lot of people, as long as they're not gathering information, they're not gathering user data or anything, but they still run HTTP. I wish there was a different way, but it's not as big of an issue with the way websites are set up now as they were like 5 years ago. 5 years ago, if you're running SSL, it was slow.
Right.
Whereas now,
yeah. And there's, like you said, there's still a performance hit, but the way that I look at it is if everyone's taking the performance hit, then it really doesn't matter, right? If everyone is excellent, then no one is. And then only the people that don't have an SSL, I mean, they're being penalized anyways because Google's security priority right now is it's such an important piece of their business to kind of promote that security side. So yeah, those sites probably aren't getting great rankings anyways, even with the speed boost they might be getting by not having an SSL.
well, and there's some technical limitations even that we don't need to get into, but whereas running SSL, for example, on certain platforms isn't as easy as it looks.
Mm-hmm.
So there is some learning curve.
Yep, I've had to manually set up some SSL certificates, like Let's Encrypt SSL scripts to run with a cron job every 89 days to make sure that the SSL was working and all this stuff on some virtual private servers that I have access to because they don't support Let's Encrypt out of the box. So I had to manually do it.
Yeah, that's crazy. But yeah, security, I think we've touched on a lot. Is there more you'd like to add?
Not at this time. I mean, the key takeaway here is two things, in my opinion. One, WordPress is no better or worse of a platform in regards to security than pretty much anything else out there in the popular open source space. And two, security is really on you as the site manager or site owner to take seriously, because if you don't, you might end up with a big cleanup bill.
Yeah, exactly. And they're not cheap. Luckily for our clients, it's pretty much built in.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I was charging a client to get me out of bed on a Sunday morning when their site gets hacked because one of their old site managers left a simple password like my dog 2013. Then I'll probably be charging them $400 or $500 to get out of bed on a Sunday morning to fix it. And that's just the nature of it.
Yeah.
Especially when it takes 6-7 hours to figure out what's really going on and then to figure out what the solution is. Because I think the mindset of hackers and people that break into your site is not only do we want to gain access to the things we want to make it to where you can't fix it very easily.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's best to be smart and it's best to reach out to people. I mean, here we are. I feel like I should plug us. Here is a good time to really, if you have questions about your website security, hit us up, presstitan.com, and we can help walk you through what you should be doing.
All right. Thank you so much.